Okay, we are live and good to go. So, good afternoon, everyone. If you're joining us live on YouTube or live on Facebook or on Zoom, or if you're watching this recording subsequently, it's really good to have you with us. We are very delighted this afternoon from the Cadbury Centre to be launching the report from the Hyphen project, a wonderful project that you'll be hearing more about in this webinar, which has been led by Grace Milton. So Grace joined the Cadbury Centre in 2017, and her PhD was on contemporary Pentecostal charismatic conversion, published as Shalom, the Spirit and Pentecostal Conversion by Brill a few years back. And Grace's research experts are in expertise in Pentecost theology and religious conversion, but also in the relationship between faith and practice in society. So she's been working on the Hyphen project for 2 years now, done an amazing job of that, and you're going to have the privilege of hearing from her in the course of this next hour or so about some of the really important findings from that work. So I'll introduce you to Grace in just a few seconds. We're also later on going to be hearing from Usha Reifschneider, who is a British Gujarati Christ follower, who is also writing her PhD on reclaiming British Gujarati culture. So I'll introduce Usha slightly later to you. But for now, Grace, it's wonderful to have you with us. Congratulations, first and foremostly, on an amazing project which you successfully completed and a brilliant report.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
So I know the answer to this because I've read the report and I've seen some of the findings and had some input in that. But what has the Hyphen project been seeking to do? What have been the goals and aims behind this work?
So the project, first and foremost, aimed to listen to the stories of people who have come to follow Jesus from another faith background and who identify as UK minority ethnic. And through those stories, it focused on the ways that people negotiate their different identities during times of life stage transition. So by life stage transition, I mean things like getting married or being civil partnered, welcoming a child, the death of a loved one, those times in our life when we take on a new role, perhaps, and life changes for us. And usually we undergo a ritual associated with that. And religious conversion and life stage transitions are both often causes of conflict in our lives. One of the reasons I think for this, it might be because life stage transitions are also times when we're asked to participate in a ritual which tells the world who we want to be seen as, what our identity is. So for a wedding, for example, you may have a lot of choice as to how you want the day to look, from what you wear to the food you eat, the music you play, the rituals you participate in. And these are wonderful, but also quite stressful times for many people. But for people who have changed faith, these can be times when conflicts come to the surface. So for a person who's come to follow Jesus, I will use the word convert from here on in. So for a convert, there may be expectations from family that they will incorporate elements of their previous religion in a child's naming ceremony, for example. And during these times, our multiple identities, which I'm calling hyphenated identities, so our cultural, our ethnic, our religious identities, they interact, and it can take time for us to work out which aspects of ourselves we want to place in the foreground on these occasions. And so in the Hyphen project, I was particularly interested to know, where do these conflicts come from and what form do they take for people who have come to follow Jesus from another faith? And it soon became quite clear that not only did conflicts take place between family members and members of participants' previous faith communities, but that there were also pressures and conflicts which came from the churches that they belonged to, and from other Christians as well. And for this reason, the findings and the recommendations in the report are aimed specifically at churches, particularly cultural majority churches in the UK. I want the report to be a really helpful guide for Christian organisations in the UK to better support and celebrate the gifts and perspectives that converts from other faith groups bring to their congregations.
Thanks, Grace. And I'm sure the report will absolutely have that impact. It's very much focused on the practicalities. There will be other academic outputs as well from the project, and there have been academic conferences that have resulted from it as well, haven't there? But you mentioned kind of hyphenated identity in that answer. What do you mean by that, and why have we gone for the title, the Hyphen Project? Will you just explain that hyphenation issue to us a bit?
Yeah, of course. So I've discovered during the Hyphen Project that hyphen and hyphenated is a bit of a divisive term. Some people love it, others hate it, but it seemed to be relevant to the particular focus that the project has on the relationship between all of our multiple identities. So we all have multiple hyphenated, if you will, identities, meaning the different groups that we belong to or the heritages that we hold. And often when we see these written down, they might include a hyphen, so such as British hyphen Asian or white hyphen British, Chinese hyphen Christian, etc. So I chose to name the project the Hyphen Project because that small little bit of punctuation can represent a crossing over point and a point of interaction, the place where our identities merge and occasionally conflict. And that balance, that interaction is the focus really of the project. So love it or hate it, hyphen is the word I've chosen to represent that point of interaction and that the merging of our different identities.
Thank you. I mean, and I think that's so important, because kind of appreciating who we are is a fundamental aspect of Christianity. So you hear loads of sermons in churches about who we are in Christ, kind of thing, and acknowledging the complexity of that in a kind of super diverse society is a great start. And so, some really important findings to my mind that emerged from your work, and so let's maybe just go through those findings and talk about what they mean and what you have in mind in them. Mm-hmm. So if I can start with the first one. So finding A, you've put, conversion to Christianity involves elements of continuity and discontinuity between one's pre-Christian context and their Christian life. These are unique to each individual. What do you mean by that?
So I think this first finding is a very fundamental one, and it speaks a little bit into the language that we use in a lot of Christian churches in the UK about conversion. So one of the central metaphors in Christianity, and particularly more evangelical denominations, of conversion is being born again, or becoming a new creation. And we can sometimes overplay the idea of conversion as a very sudden and dramatic change, whereby the old life is gone and you are a completely new person in Christ. And I don't want to downplay the importance of that metaphor. I'm not suggesting that metaphor is completely removed, but there can be problems sometimes when our focus on conversion is on this idea that everything that's happened before has to be rejected and is gone, particularly for someone converting from another faith and from a UK minority ethnicity as well, because that message can sometimes come across as you need to reject everything to do with your previous religion, and that can sound like it includes family members, elements of your upbringing and your culture that are closely tied in with that religion. And so this particular finding is a reminder, I suppose, that for anybody who becomes a Christian, there will be certainly things from their pre-Christian context that they will leave behind, but there will be plenty that comes with them from their upbringing, from their previous faith, and absolutely from all of our cultural backgrounds and heritages as well. So it's a reminder, a very baseline reminder that when someone becomes a Christian, they don't need to reject everything that's gone before, that there's a lot that comes with them in that.
I think that's really helpful, because there are just so many layers to what makes for religion, aren't there? So there are very strongly cultural elements, there are belief or ideological elements, there are kind of religious practice elements, and all kinds of different aspects, and some of those are fundamental to our identity and fundamental to who we are, and it's very difficult to just kind of switch those off and forget about them, pretend they never happened. And I'd certainly agree with you. That's not what the Bible's asking us to do when it talks about thinking of conversion as a kind of new life. It's talking about putting away the problematic attitudes and behaviors and kind of having a fresh start, a fresh opportunity. But that doesn't mean kind of wiping the positive elements of one's history and one's identity, does it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Secondly, then, the second key finding, which really builds on that comment, converts from other faiths often have to undergo a process of identity formation whereby they negotiate the balance and relationship between their cultural and religious identities. Explain to us what you mean by this, would you?
So this is really the fact that when somebody becomes a Christian, for those of us, and I include myself in this, who belong to the majority culture in the UK, so white British, it may be that we don't really engage much with how our culture and our faith interact, because it is the majority culture and the majority faith group in this country. And so there's sometimes the assumption that our culture and our faith just naturally go together. I'll come back to the fact that that's not necessarily true. But if you are somebody who is from a UK minority ethnicity and a non-Christian religion as well, there will be many times through your Christian life when you will have to decide what to engage with and not to engage with. So there may be a family occasion that is coming up in a place of worship of a different faith, and you may have to decide, am I okay to go into a different place of worship? Am I okay to participate in this particular ritual? For some people, the answer will be very clear, and for others it can be a bit more confusing. And so this is just to recognize that that is a process that converts from other faiths regularly have to undergo. And if they belong to a congregation that is part of the majority culture, or white British majority church, for example, often they're left to undergo this by themselves, and people in the church may not even be aware that they are going through this process and this reflection, which can at times be quite painful. A number of participants in the Hyphen project were concerned, thinking about the future death of their parents, for obvious reasons, but also because their parents belong to a different faith. But they, as their children, would be expected to participate in certain funeral rituals. And there's this conflict between wanting to honor one's parents and their faith, but on the other hand, perhaps being told by your church you're not allowed to participate in the rituals of other faiths. And so that can be very, very difficult and very painful for some people. One other thing to mention on this particular finding is that majority culture Christians often don't undergo this same process of reflecting on the ways that our culture and our faith interact and what is compatible and what isn't compatible. But I would argue that we need to be, that it isn't something that just people from minority ethnic backgrounds and non-Christian faiths have to undergo. It's something that all Christians should be doing, to think about the culture, the world that we're living in, and how that interacts with our faith. So it's a reminder again, but it's also an encouragement to majority culture churches to be undergoing this process themselves, and then we will be better equipped to support everybody who goes through this process.
I think that's a really important point in its own right as well, that the kind of connection between religion and culture is challenging and uncertain and unclear. Whichever religion and whichever culture we're talking about, it's hard to distinguish what's distinctively Indian from what's distinctively Hindu, and sometimes British and Christian are used as synonymous where they're really entirely not at all. And I think that's a fundamental observation which should be fairly obvious to us, especially from the evangelical Christian tradition that wants to think of a kind of crisis conversion point in many ways. And I know in other contexts you'd push back at that and you would question that, but that the kind of transition to Christian with a capital C, if you like, sometimes makes the distinction between British and Christian all the more important and all the more striking. But still, in kind of finding C, you highlight, and I think quite rightly, there is still a lack of understanding and engagement from white British majority churches and Christian organizations with individuals and organizations from different faiths. And again, possibly this is particularly a challenge for evangelicals, but there's clearly a problem here, isn't there?
Absolutely, yes, I think so. And in the UK, we are still very separated in our churches. The very fact that we're talking about these recommendations for white British majority churches shows that we do separate ourselves out. And I'm hoping that some of the recommendations that I'm putting forward will help to create more welcoming and more multicultural congregations. But yes, finding C that you referred to there, that there's a lack of understanding and engagement from these cultural majority churches with individuals and organizations from different faiths. One thing that came up from respondents was the idea of being perhaps the only person in their congregation from their particular religious background or even their particular ethnic background. And that can either, it can go one of two ways, really. It can mean that they are ignored entirely sometimes, completely just overlooked, or they can be seen as perhaps a token, oh, here's somebody in our congregation who used to be Hindu, now they're Christian, so let's bring them out every time we need to talk about conversion because they are an expert on that topic, or let's bring them out whenever we want to talk about Hinduism or other faiths because they are an expert. And so it can lead to tokenism as well as people being ignored. And part of that is because I think when we don't engage and have genuine relationships and community with people from different faith backgrounds and different ethnicities as well, then those of us who belong to the majority culture then fall back onto stereotypes and generalizations about those cultures or those faiths. And one problem as well that comes from this is that we then aren't able to differentiate between what is religious and what is cultural. We talked just now about how white British and Christianity can get conflated with one another, whereas they're actually very different. But we can do the same with other faiths as well. So, for example, participants talking about becoming Christian and feeling that as well as rejecting their their Hinduism, they had to reject their Indianness alongside that. And in churches, if we're not careful, we can perpetuate that and suggest that in order to be Christian, you have to look and act white British, and that is a problem that I think also comes from a lack of genuine relationship and community between people of different faiths, and particularly from white British majority churches in the UK.
It's a huge problem, isn't it? And to my mind, one of the saddest things about it is it completely undermines the image that you see in the book of Revelation of the church gathered around the throne of God from every tongue, tribe, and nation, a representation of all spheres of society, all genders, all political beliefs, all backgrounds, and that genuinely inclusive church is kind of not always as prominent as we'd like it to be. And that's really what you say in your fourth and final major finding. Really, there is a lack of understanding from white British majority churches with converts from other faiths in their congregations. And in just a few minutes, we'll talk about some of the strategies that you've been working on that can try and address those problems. But some really important findings, some really important insights there, Grace, and people will be able to read those in the report, which is available now on the Cadbury Centre website and on the Hyphen Project website in particular, which is birmingham.ac.uk/hyphen, I think. I believe that's the.
I can find out.
I think it's I think it's hyphen, or you can certainly find it via the Cadbury Centre website, or you can just Google the Hyphen Project, University of Birmingham, or Grace's name, and the report is up there for you to read. It's a very readable, short, clear to the point report. So do go download that. And the academic publications will be emerging over the months to come as well. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So let's get the perspective, shall we, of somebody who falls into the category of Christian that we've been talking about. It's really wonderful to have Usha with us. As I said earlier, Usha is a British Gujarati Christ follower. She's worked as a mission partner since 1988, serving migrants in the Middle East, North America and Britain. She's currently writing her own PhD thesis on reclaiming British Gujarati culture for British Gujarati converts to evangelical Christianity. So, Usha, we're really grateful to you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on Grace's work. Please, all over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm genuinely very grateful that you have taken the time and the trouble to produce such high quality work. It really is encouraging, and not just as a Christ follower, but as an academic as well, to no longer feel the sort of othered sort of minority, to actually genuinely feel that we've got something to contribute to this whole growth of Christianity as it is in Britain today. I think the report touched on some very, very important things, and I'm really happy to be able to discuss those with you today. Yeah.
So what, from your perspective, Usha, what would you say are some of the key fundamental points? What are the issues that strike you most significantly in terms of Grace's work? What had particular resonance for you?
I think the continuity and discontinuity, this idea, I think you used the word spectrum, that there is a broad spectrum. And so understanding that isn't a linear process, that they're actually a back and forth. And our multiple identities, I call myself British Gujarati Christ follower. And at times the Christ follower comes before the British, and at times the Gujarati comes before the British, at times the British comes before And so there is a constant interplay. And so there is movement on that spectrum. It isn't that once we've arrived and we've learned everything, that's it, we're in the church, you know, put a label on us, we're done. Because this is a lifelong spectrum that we have to deal with. And it doesn't mean that we want to be a squeaky wheel. It's just that these are just genuine things that we have to work through. So it's not like, well, once the discipleship's done, now that they can get on with it. We need the constant to and fro. So I think that continuity and discontinuity was very, very important. And also acknowledging that actually this isn't just Hindus and people from other faiths that go through that, but it's actually all of us. And it stops the Christian life being an act that's performed between 10 and 12 on a Sunday morning. It actually brings a multi-dimensional aspect to our faith. And that can only be a good thing for all of us. I like that you said about the involvement of majority world people in the church. And you're right when you say that just having one convert doesn't make them the expert on their religion. What that does is it makes us a shortcut for you to not have to engage with other people. And we don't want to be that shortcut. We want to learn. We want you to learn. And we want it to be a continual process, not just something that you pull out once in a while, like a box of Christmas decorations. And also, we're not a decoration. We can speak about things other than the fact that we're converts. And we don't want to be, and I say we, because in my research, there are 300 British Gujarati Christians, and I've spoken to 200 of them and interviewed 50. So I don't feel that I'm sort of usurping somebody else's position here, but I do feel that a lot of what came out in my interviews said that we are more than just our conversion. We're more than that. And we can make contributions in church that are not just a plate of samosa or singing How Great Is Our God in a different language. There is so much more that we want to be a part of and we want to give to as well as take from. So I like that you sort of handled that stereotype very well. Also, there was a mention of in the report of the majority culture church seeking to engage and partner with diaspora churches. I think that's a massive benefit to the majority church and the diaspora churches. I don't think we fully grasped how much that can help us grow in our theology. The fact that I am speaking to you in English limits, it extends a lot, but it also limits something of what I can do just with English. Whereas when we think about sort of involving Arab conversations and Nigerian conversations and hearing things in Swahili, it's such an important part of our expressing our identity to make the confines of the church actually broader, to pull people in instead of pushing people out. So I think that was lovely. Yeah. And the authenticity of friendships. Very good. Yeah.
I really love the thought about making the church broader and pushing those boundaries out further. I think that's so critical. The church needs to reflect the society that it's engaging with, doesn't it? And it needs to reflect that aspiration in Revelation, as we said. Thank you so much, Usha. Grace, any comments in response? Any questions that you want to ask Usha?
Thank you so much, Usha. And I want to say that everyone should go and read Usha's research on this as well. I would say far more extensive than my own and really, really insightful. So do go and read her work. What you say that you are not a decoration, you are not a shortcut. I think that's hugely important. I think if maybe there was a snappy quote for the project, that would be it. So that is a message that needs to be sent out to majority culture churches. And talking about I suppose, discipleship and this interaction between culture and faith as a lifelong process, and conversion as a lifelong process, but not just for people who convert from other faiths, but for everybody. I wonder sometimes if we in majority culture churches find converts from other faiths uncomfortable because they highlight that fact that it is an ongoing process and needs to be an ongoing process for everybody, and hold a bit of a mirror up to cultural majority churches as well. I think that's a really, really important point to make. I just as Andrew said, just love that idea of the confines of the church becoming broader. And I really hope, the report is aimed at leaders and members of white British majority churches, but what I would love to see is that there is no such thing as a white British majority church in that sense. That we can so often in our churches, if they are cultural majority churches, have no idea what Christianity globally looks like. But I'm based in Birmingham, but I can attend a white British majority church and have no idea of the diversity of my own city, let alone the diversity of the global church. And so, that's something that I really hope this report will change. And I thank you so much for your comments on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Grace, and thanks so much, Usha. We'll come back to you later on for some final comments as well. But really appreciate those really helpful insights and that affirmation. And Grace, your report makes 9 specific recommendations. So let's just kind of whiz through some of those and just highlight those key issues that you have in mind, really. So the first recommendation you have is that church leaders and mission organizations should ensure that their language about conversion and converts actively recognizes the fact that there will be areas of continuity and discontinuity for all believers. We've talked about that a little bit, haven't we? This developing holistic understanding of conversion should be reflected in the theological language used about conversion. Anything to add to that or to clarify there?
It's just to say really that some of the way that we think about conversion is shaped by the language that we use, and that this is just a recommendation to suggest that we need to look again at the language that we are using and the language that dominates our discussions about conversion, and make sure that the language we use reflects and serves people and their experiences. So just to say that we need to broaden, not remove the born again metaphors, but perhaps include a wider range of metaphors for conversion in our churches, so that the continuity and the discontinuity of all believers is at the forefront. So it doesn't seem strange when someone is bringing elements of their life and their upbringing into their Christian life, that is the norm and that is expected. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And that very much connects to the second recommendation as well. So individual Christian ministries need to think about their discourse on conversion across all departments, in the discipleship, pastoral care, children's work and youth work, as well as for mission, evangelism and interfaith relations. I think that's a really important recommendation, irrespective of issues around hyphenated identity. What conversion looks like and how we understand it is a central part of what it means to be the body of Christ. But it's especially important in the context of this research, I think. So you then continue and you say, third recommendation, there is a need for active reflection and institutional education on cultural and religious identity for all Christians, Love this. This is super. There must be reflection and action surrounding the cultural aspects of individual churches and wider organisations, as well as differentiating between theological and cultural expectations of congregation members. This will necessarily involve critical reflection on issues of race and ethnic identity, as well as a focus on identifying the ways that our cultural contexts influence our faith. This is something that should be emphasised and offered within Christian organisations. I, for one, couldn't agree more. Tell us what you mean by this.
In the UK context, there has for a long time been a conflation between white Britishness and Christianity, and culture and religion in that sense are quite entangled, and it's in the very fibre and fabric of some of our churches as well. You know, if you look around you and see stained glass windows of white Bible characters around and all of that. And this is really an attempt to untangle some of that and to get us thinking about what is cultural and what is religious. What are the expectations that we have in churches of Christians? Which of those are actually theological, which of those are biblical, and which of those are just tradition and British culture that for a very, very long time has been tangled up with the gospel and theology in a way that's hard to untangle. So this is just one of many, or I am one of many, many voices out there at the moment calling for this untangling to take place. But that has to be an active thing, and it has to be an institutional thing, because the tangling is an institutional problem that we need to address.
Thank you. And I guess that's where you headed as well in the fourth recommendation, where you say majority culture church leaders should seek to engage and partner with local diaspora churches through shared resources, services, celebrations, building friendships, and learning from Christians from different ethnic backgrounds. The diversity and vitality of the global Christian faith will be made more visible.
Absolutely, yeah.
You then move on to a couple of recommendations around interfaith engagement, and interfaith has been a kind of challenging topic for evangelicals to engage with in some ways, hasn't it? But your first recommendation in this space says interfaith engagement should be a central part of church life wherever possible. This should be open, hospitable, and not motivated by conversion. Interfaith engagement and/or training should be an important part of discipleship and pastoral care within congregations, as well as evangelism and mission. A second recommendation in the same space, maybe you can address the two together, says that interfaith guidelines at denominational and local level should include guidelines for pastoral care and discipleship of converts from other faiths. Anything to add on those observations there?
Yeah, so just to take the last line of the finding on that one, I say that interfaith engagement does not end once someone becomes a Christian. I think sometimes we can have this idea that there is the interfaith engagement group of a church or a denomination, and they go and they do that thing. And then if somebody converts, then that's great. Now they're a Christian. There's no more interfaith engagement. But ignoring all that we've discussed before about continuity, discontinuity, the fact that just because somebody now attends church and identifies as Christian, perhaps, doesn't mean that they are not still in relationships and families and communities of other faiths, and that person themselves is shaped by their previous faith or the faith of their upbringing, and so it's not something, interfaith engagement isn't something that happens outside of the church walls. It's happening within the church walls. It's happening, as Usha, you were saying, Christianity isn't something that just happens for a few hours on a Sunday. It's recognizing that interfaith engagement is a part of people's lives day to day. And so making sure that that is centralized in church life, that it's not just seen as one thing that people go out and do, and making sure that people are not trained as such, but that it's talked about and that there's awareness of it in discipleship and pastoral care, as well as just people who go out to evangelize, I suppose.
Thank you. And I wonder if that's kind of one area, one of the many areas in which global perspectives on Christianity are really especially helpful to us in terms of the development of British Christianity, because it does sometimes feel as if British Christianity is very Sunday morning focused. And there are so many other cultures in the world where religion is actively integrated into what it means to be a human being. We seem sometimes to have kind of made religion into like tea and scones on the vicarage garden on a Saturday, and then kind of an hour in the church building singing a few hymns. But the global perspective on Christianity has never really understood the Christian faith in that context, really. And you have some great, in the final cluster of recommendations, you have some great recommendations on building those authentic connections. That word authenticity that Usha highlighted earlier is crucial here, I think. So recommendation 7, in order for church communities to build authentic friendships and provide a supportive family for Christians from other religious backgrounds, these churches must demonstrate openness, hospitality, and a willingness to learn from other faiths and cultures other than white British Christian. Secondly, in this section, you say kind of where appropriate and in conjunction with the convert, reaching out to families of converts sensitively can help remove some of the assumptions and stereotypes made by churches and families alike. This may take the form of offering new Christians and friends family a tour of the church building and a discussion about how different aspects of the faith community and services operate. I really like that, because you're highlighting there the impact that conversion of an individual has for their wider family as well. They may kind of struggle to come to terms with that themselves as well. And then finally, and then I'll kind of ask you to expand on these. You've written, attention should be given by denominational training institutions and individual church leaders to ensure that relevant leaders and pastoral carers are trained in ritual creativity. I love that phrase. So many great kind of concepts and ideas and phrases in here, which, if we can grasp them, can be transformative in this issue and also more broadly. So ritual creativity means that they develop the ability and skills to think about traditional rituals in a fresh way and to be creative with adapting and transforming rituals to express a greater diversity of cultural needs. 3 really important recommendations. Anything to add to those?
I'd like to highlight, I think, the second of those particularly, because that came from one participant in particular who had that experience of that happening, maybe partially, and how important that was to him. So I thought it was an important recommendation, because I don't think many churches do it. Just the thought that for some people, if you were not brought up with an understanding of churches or church buildings or how they work, and this is true whether you come from another faith or no faith, then suddenly going into a church, identifying as Christian, and everyone assuming you know how it works, you know where you can go, where you can't go, you know whether you have to queue for communion or not queue for communion, and it's different across every denomination as well. And so just offering, it could be a group of people, it could be individuals, but just offering a way in to say, let's show you around the building, let's sort of demystify some of these things that you're going to encounter, because being placed in the middle of a situation where everyone else knows what's going on and you don't is another way of singling you out and making you feel other as well. And so that's one way of helping people not to feel othered in that situation as well. And on the third point, I feel quite passionately about this idea of ritual creativity, having focused and heard a lot from people about the rituals that they've gone through and the life stages that they've had since becoming Christians. There have been occasions when they felt that they have to go with the flow and fit into a particular mold, whether that's getting married or various other things, or their baptism or something. How is this done in this particular church? How is this done by white British Christians? How can I make sure that I fit in and show everyone that I fit in, and don't involve too much from my cultural heritage or even from my previous faith? As Christians, we can be quite hesitant to allow aspects of even other denominations, let alone other faiths, into the services and the rituals that we perform in our churches for people. And sometimes that can mean that we reject cultural aspects, even if they're not necessarily religious. And so I think this idea of flexibility and creativity in rituals is very important in allowing people to express themselves and their Christianity in a more global way, not just here's how we do things in British Christianity and you have to fit this mold. It broadens the confines of the church, again, as you were saying, Usha, by in a very small way, but maybe a helpful way.
I think that core point that embracing cultural practices, embracing personal and family histories isn't syncretism, isn't religious hybridity or anything like that. I think that's a really crucial point that comes through very plainly, and will help a lot of church leaders if they can begin to understand that. Usha, as we come towards a close of the webinar, any kind of final thoughts or observations or comments from you?
Yeah, I'd like to think about the term interfaith, because I think for a lot of Christians, as soon as you say interfaith, you begin to question whether you're sort of drifting towards pluralism and sort of moving away from Christianity as truth. But I've been thinking about some of the concerns of the church at the moment, especially recently, for things such as creation care. That's become a big ministry issue in churches across the board. And I don't know if you know this, but when the Indians first started traveling to Africa before the Europeans came on the scene, the Jains, which are part of the Indian faiths, used to go with the traders. And when they went to Africa, they would do things for the environment there. They actually had insect hospitals, not just animal hospitals, but insect hospitals. And they have an understanding of taking care of creation that we as Christians perhaps have not understood to that greater degree. Now, when we think of interfaith, wouldn't it be great if as Christians we could accept the expertise of the Jains of thousands of years of creation care as we develop our creation care ministries? So it's hard to not think of ourselves as the experts on everything. And I think that's part of the interfaith dialogue that would draw people to who Jesus Christ might be in their lives. Not just creation care, but other things, the way that we take care of our elderly and our children, and the honor it is for me to put food in the mouth of an elderly person, to extend their life because they extended mine. Not just, these are not my parents, but just to see that cycle of care and love and attention and relationship that is perhaps less emphasized in Christianity as we see it today. So I think when we think of interfaith, we're not just looking to convince and just for friendships, but to be genuinely informed of how we can do life together. So yeah, that's my thought on the interfaith.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to give the final word to Dr. Milton in just a moment. But let me again remind you, you can access the report. I checked the website. It is birmingham.ac.uk/project. So if you want to access the project website, there's also information there on some of the academic conferences that have and other events that have gone alongside the project, and you can access the report there, as well as this totally stunning photograph that every time I look at it, I adore. Grace, again, many congratulations on successful completion of a really important project. We hope and pray that it will go on to have immense impact. I know you've spoken to various people in various Christian denominations about taking some of those ideas forward, and we look forward to hearing more about those as time goes by. But let me give you the final word then. How would you like to kind of summarize the last 2.5-3 years of kind of work on here? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me share the findings and recommendations as well. And I think the summary really is that I hope that majority culture churches in the UK will not get defensive about the content of the reports, but to see it as an opportunity, to see it as an opportunity to reflect on the ways that maybe we act as a barrier to some people, and to remove those barriers and to broaden out the boundaries of the church in the UK, and for the church in the UK to be truly global and truly diverse in that vision that there is in the book of Revelation that you talked about, Andrew, of every tribe, every tongue, every nation worshipping together. And so I really hope that this report will be used, taken on board, and that it'll inform policies and just to allow church in the UK to become a truly global family for new Christians and for all of us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Usha, and thank you so much, Grace, for this amazing contribution to knowledge. We'll draw it to a close. Thank you very much for your attendance.